What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? She walked the yard like someone stepping around a memory that might still be hungry. Frost threaded the fence and the morning smelled of old hay and cold wool. The stable had a shape to it. One empty stall. One stall that kept someone's scent. She kept her hands in her pockets because the world asked her to be practical first. She checked the water trough. It was half-iced, the horse having broken it the day before with a patient nose. She chipped the rim free and let the water give, as if small tasks could anchor a drifting mind. Grief, she discovered, organizes itself into chores. She did not tell anyone a name. Names belonged to people who kept coming back. At night, she whispered something soft into the dark of the stall. The horse listened with cool, patient ears. His breath fogged the space between them and smelled like dust and rain on hot ground. He was an Appaloosa, not large, but marked like a map left open on a table. His coat made quiet patterns. His skin had the honest texture of things that had weathered. He kept distance at first, the way sensible animals keep distance from complicated humans. Not fear. Caution. An economy of trust. She learned his rituals without permission. He pawed the same corner each morning. He leaned his head out the stall when it rained. He flinched at sudden noises and watched the sky when hawks passed. He lowered his head near the fence, like a man listening for a song he could not remember. On the 10th morning, she stopped pretending. She wasn't watching. She learned how to stand like someone who knows the horse is weighing the same things she was. When she stepped into the aisle, he lifted his head and smelled her from a distance, a slow, deliberate test. His nostrils flared. He took one careful step forward and touched the sleeve of her jacket with the tip of his nose. The touch felt like permission. It was not a blaze of comfort, only the soft click of two lives recognizing one another. She felt something in her chest move, not fixed joy, not relief, but a tiny loosening. She let tears come because the tears made the room smaller than the absent person's absence. The early days were small. Negotiations. He refused one brand of grain and would not cross a certain corner of the pasture. She noticed a pale scar on his hip and held it like something she did not yet know how to read. Responded to simple things. A halter warmed by her hands, a blanket she folded the same way each night. When she ran her palm along his flank, he would close his eyes and lean into the pressure as if settling a ledger. They developed a quiet vocabulary. A lift of her hand closed a gate. A soft whistle brought him to the fence. He learned where thunder hid and found the part of her knee that softened at the sound. The barn became a room with two people in it, though one of them had 4 legs and a patience older than grief. Sometimes he stared past the field toward a place she could not see. On those evenings his nostrils flared and his ears pinned just so, as if echoing a memory. She followed his gaze and felt the odd sensation of 2 maps overlapped. Hers inked with loss, his with roads she hadn't walked. She wanted answers. Who had he known before? Why that scar? Why the moments he seemed to breathe in a past she could not smell? Her questions felt like accusations, so she let them sit cold in her mouth and kept working the halter. Neighbors called him Painter because his spots looked like quick strokes. They said it lightly and then stopped, the name folding back into the hush of things not spoken. She did not reach for the name. She let it exist without claiming it. Their first real agreement came on a gray afternoon when rain gritted the air. She opened the stall and did not move too quickly. He moved beside her and lowered his head into her shoulder for a length of time so ordinary it almost made her dizzy. It was not possessive. It was not dramatic. It was the simple act of a creature steadying another. That night she sat on an upturned feed bag and talked aloud as the barn smelled of tar and hay. She spoke small truths the way people stitch small hymns under their shirts. She said things that would have been unbearable to say at a kitchen table where ghosts still sat in the chairs. She told him about the way the house sounded different in the afternoons, about a photograph she could not bear to fold open. He listened, shifting his weight, flattening his ears when she reached a point that made her hands tremble. At one point he nudged her arm with a deliberate gentleness, the sort of motion that insists on presence. Open the gate, tie the lead, lift the blanket. It felt like a language that held no judgment. Late on the porch, With the house behind her and the horse's steady breathing ahead, she realized she had begun to make space for something small and new. The world did not rearrange itself overnight. The empty parts remained, but between two breaths, between the closing of a stable door and the creak of the gate, there was a thread she hadn't expected. There were nights she woke thinking she had heard a hoofbeat at the far end of the yard, not a human shoe, but the steady, confident strike of a horse that knew old roads. She would sit with the window open and listen. Sometimes the sound carried a memory she could not name, as though the horse kept a path through other lives and routed it toward her in the thin dark. Hours. She walked back toward the house and stopped when she saw him at the gate. His coat was a dim constellation against the twilight. Lowered his head in a slow, deliberate gesture, the simple bow of a creature offering itself as witness. She did not call him. She did not need to. He took a step after her, and the sound of his hooves was not loud, only the soft footfall of something willing to follow. It was a small, precise permission. "I will come if you let me." She closed the porch door, and the house felt colder and larger and possible at once. There was a tremor running through her like a loose stitch, as if some seam had begun to pull apart so a new thing might lie in it. What did you do when the only thing left of someone you loved was a horse who would not be kept at a distance? And what, if anything, would he lead her to find next? She began to notice the small things that did not make sense until they did. Painter, she still tasted the name like dirt under her tongue, would stand at the far edge of the pasture and fix his ears toward the scrub where the road dipped into the trees. He would lift one foreleg and hold it there, a statue, thinking, and when she walked toward him, he would follow with a slow, certain step as if retracing a path he had always known. Once, when the late sun slanted through the willows, he broke into a canter along the fence line and then stopped at a spot where the grass thinned and the earth smelled of old smoke. He pawed once and turned to look at her, and in the way a sensible animal looks back, there was the impression of a question. "Did you lose anything here?" She tried to be pragmatic about it. Feed schedules, farrier visits, small domestic economies that grief could not dismantle. But grief is porous. It leaks into the daily with a patience that makes you forget how to guard yourself. She found herself tracing the scar at Painter's hip, imagining the past like a map she had not been given the coordinates for. There were times he seemed to recall a person in the way a bell remembers a hand, ears forward at a sound no one else heard, nostrils flaring at a name she had never spoken aloud. The first time he reacted to the loft, she nearly laughed at herself. She had climbed with a flickering flashlight to sweep down a cobwebbed shelf of old bridles when the horse's whicker came from below. He walked to the stable door and banged his head against the latch in an impatient animal insistence. She came down and opened the door, and he smelled the air and breathed in a way that suggested recognition. She did not know what he knew, only that he believed something worth finding was up there. She unclipped an old saddle and it fell open like a book. Beneath the folds of a horse blanket, she found a folded scrap of paper, corners browned as if softened by years of being handled. Her hands betrayed her before her eyes could. They trembled, small and useless like a child's when she opens a box of keepsakes. The handwriting was uneven, the letters looped and impatient. It had been addressed to no one, or to the whole invisible room of possible readers. She sat on the hay bag and read, and the words landed as if someone had flung them out of a window. It was not a flourish. It was practical tenderness, reminders about where keys were kept, a small reprimand about mowing the west field in August, a joke about Painter refusing grain when the oats were stale. Then in the middle of the list a line that stopped her breath. "If you ever feel you can't stay, take Painter to Miller's Hollow. Tie him beneath the old oak and sit on the rock. You'll know why." There was no signature. The letter smelled of saddle soap and iron. She let the paper fall into her lap, and the room tilted so that the barn felt very far away, and also like the only thing that made any sense. She could not tell whether she was relieved or more undone. The instruction was both an invitation and a challenge. She had been carrying avoidance like an armor. The letter felt like a key. Painter's reaction was small and immediate. He leaned his head into the doorway and nudged her knee like a clock insisting on the time. When she went outside and led him toward the lane, his steps were brisk but not frantic. He walked as if the memory in his body knew the map better than her. The hollow was a quarter-mile down, a narrow ribbon of road lined with thistle and old telephone poles. the kind of place the town had not cleaned up because it was made of weather and routine. The old oak she expected to be diminished by age stood with a stubborn dignity, branches like arms. Beneath it lay a flat stone, half swallowed by lichen, the same stone the letter had mentioned. She sat on the rock and Painter nosed at the grass, then dropped his head and rested it on his forelegs, eyes half closed. For a long time there was only the rhythm of his breathing and the low ache in her chest that belonged to morning. When she unfolded the courage to look, she found a small tin, tucked in the roots where the earth had been soft and someone had dug carefully and then hidden the box again. Inside was a photograph, the paper curled at the corners, the face in it so alive that her stomach went cold. The person she had lost, older in the way photographs make people older, smiling at the camera with a hand on Painter's flank. Scribbled on the back was a sentence so ordinary it cracked open everything. Keep her here sometimes. She liked that the horse would be company. The sound that came from her then was not a sob the way she understood it, but a breaking, the kind that remakes the shape of a thing. She pressed the photograph to her chest and the wind took the sound of her breath and did nothing to mend it. Painter shifted his weight and rested his head against her shoulder, the warm, steady press of an animal that knows how to stay. He did not try to fix her. Animals rarely attempt dramatic rescues. He simply existed with her in the particular way a lighthouse exists near a shore. The revelation did not erase the dull, persistent ache. It pivoted it. Grief changed its posture. The letter gave her something precise to hold on to, an instruction that threaded the past into the present with a small human kindness. It did not commodify pain. It directed it toward a task. She could honor by tending, by keeping, by returning to the rock and the oak. In the days that followed, the pace of mourning shifted. She rose earlier, not because hope had arrived like a guest, but because a small duty had steadied her. She wound Painter's mane, checked the saddle straps, and sometimes carried out 2 cups of coffee to stand at the fence and watch the light move across his coat. The town watched it too. Neighbors began to say she was getting her color back, as if skin could be proof of inner repair. She knew better. The repairs were slow and not always linear. There were mornings that still felt like walking through deep mud. There were afternoons when she would stand with the photograph in her pocket, and the grief would return with the grief's own logic. The horse met those returns with the same patient strategy. When she sat too long in the house and the silence curdled, Painter would be at the gate, ears forward and eyes expectant. When the letter's instructions felt like a cruel joke because life had no guarantee, Painter would press his flank to her leg and lean so that the world felt less like a negotiation and more like a shared breath. He learned small consolations. When she could not bear conversation, he would nudge her hand until she stroked him. When she could laugh, he would do something ridiculous with his lips and she would laugh with him for no reason, but to see motion move through the day. Weeks turned into a slow season. She planted a sapling under the oak, a tiny thing that promised to hold a shadow in years she might or might not see. She drove Painter along the lane until his hooves remembered the road, and he whickered at familiar fences as if saying hello to ghosts they both recognized. The barnless nights felt less like a cavern and more like a room where windows were beginning to open. The final gift came not as a revelation but as a permission. One dusky evening, Painter stopped at the field's edge and looked toward the horizon like a man who had remembered the way to stand upright. He inhaled, and when she took his bridle and looked him in the eye, she understood without words. The letter had not asked her to forget. It had not asked her to replace what was gone. It had asked her to be present enough to let care in. That was the shape of what she had been given. A small, steady map whose ink read simply, "Stay." She stayed. She learned the cadence of mornings. She learned to speak the name of the person she had lost without flinching. She learned sorrows could sit beside what remained, not always in combat but as neighbors. Painter, with his dotted coat and quiet intelligence, kept his shoulder by hers in ways that had nothing to do with heroism and everything to do with constancy. They moved through a year like 2 people who had agreed to meet at a corner and then showed up, day after day. Sometimes at night she would take the photograph from the tin and lay it on the kitchen table and watch the way the lamplight softened the edges. The world did not promise neat endings. It offered small mercies stitched into routine. A halter hung on the peg. A gate closed with the same clunk as yesterday. a horse breathing steady in the dark. The thunder of emptiness had lost some of its volume. She found in the steady small attentions that she could build a life that honored absence without being reduced to it. On the last evening of the season, she led Painter to the oak and tied the lead rope with hands that had finished trembling. She stood under the branches that had watched them both and felt the thin, precise weight of being alive again. Painter breathed in the dusk and shifted his weight and nudged her palm. The nudge said simply, "We kept going." If this story touched you, subscribe, comment, follow, and press the bell icon to watch daily videos and enjoy.